speaks Koresh when he thinks no one is listening. He speaks it to objects, to himself, to the air. And it's not fragments or broken phrases. It's fluent, native-level fluent. The grammar is perfect. The tonal patterns are exact. Mrs. Reeves, I need to know where he learned this because if he's been exposed to materials that shouldn't exist, there could be serious implications. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell her she was mistaken, that my son was just making noises, that this was all a misunderstanding. But I'd seen the videos, I'd heard the complexity, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a memory was surfacing. My father's study. The one room in his house I'd never been allowed to enter as a child. The recordings he'd played late at night when he thought everyone was asleep. My father who'd died 6 months ago and left Oliver a locked trunk in his will. The drive home was a blur. I called my husband from the car and told him we needed to talk the moment I got back. Dennis was in the garage when I pulled in, organizing his fishing gear for a trip he'd planned next month. Normal life continuing in blissful ignorance while my world tilted sideways. "What's wrong?" he asked, seeing my face. I told him everything. The teacher's revelation, the extinct language, the CIA classification. He listened with growing confusion, then shook his head. "Babe, she's probably overreacting. Maybe Oliver learned some made-up language from a YouTube video. Kids do that. Remember when he tried to teach himself Klingon?" I wanted to believe him, but Mrs. Pemberton's credentials and her fear had been too genuine. "We need to look at what my dad left Oliver. The trunk." Dennis's expression shifted. "Your dad's trunk? The one you said we shouldn't open because it felt like violating his privacy?" I was already heading toward the basement where we'd stored it 6 months ago. The trunk was military-grade, dark green metal with a combination lock I'd never tried to open. My father's instructions had been specific in his will. For Oliver only, to be opened when he asks about the recordings. At the time, I'd thought it was just my father being cryptical. He'd always been secretive about his work as a translator for various government agencies. Now those words felt ominous. Dennis followed me down the basement stairs. "What recordings? Your dad never mentioned recordings to me." He'd mentioned them to me exactly once, when I was 16. I'd found him crying in his study late one night, a bottle of scotch empty on his desk and foreign voices playing from speakers I couldn't see. When I'd asked what he was listening to, he'd looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize and said, "The voices of people who don't exist anymore, people I couldn't save." I'd left him there and never asked again. Now I wondered if those voices had been speaking Koresh. The trunk sat in the corner behind boxes of Christmas decorations. I'd avoided it for months, telling myself I was respecting my father's wishes. But truthfully, I'd been afraid of what I might find. My father's death had been sudden, a stroke at 72 while he was working in his study. The paramedics said he'd been dead for hours before my mother found him. His computer had been running, headphones still on his head, playing something she couldn't identify. She'd turned it off without listening. Dennis helped me drag the trunk into the light. "Do you know the combination?" I shook my head, but as I looked at the lock, muscle memory took over. My fingers moved to numbers before my conscious mind caught up. 3.
Click the link in my bio to get the full story for free.